I'm Vivian Castle, 50 years old, and I spent 30 years in the United States Army, rising from an enlisted intelligence analyst all the way to brigadier general. For 3 decades, I carried work I could never explain to the people I loved most, and I let them believe whatever they wanted about me. But when a major put his hand on my arm and walked me out of the White House Situation Room minutes before I was set to brief the president, I had to decide what to do with a lifetime of being underestimated. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who never once bothered to find out who you really were? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to hold your head high after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. The first thing I learned about respect, I learned in a small house in Dayton, Ohio, where my father ran Saturday mornings like a formation. He would be up before the sun, boots already on, a list of chores written out in the same blocky hand he used for everything. By the time I came downstairs, he had a way of looking at whatever I was holding and deciding what it was worth. Usually I was holding a book. Usually it was worth very little to him. My father was a first sergeant in the Army infantry, and to him the world divided cleanly into people who carried weight and people who watched other people carry it. He had carried a wounded man 2 miles once, in a country he rarely named, and that single fact sat at the center of who he believed a soldier was supposed to be. A soldier had mud on his boots and a rifle on his back. A soldier did not sit at a desk. A soldier did not, as he liked to put it, play with words. I was a girl who played with words. By the time I was 10, I could read in 3 languages, and I did it at the kitchen table while the eggs went cold, because the sentences were more interesting than the food. My mother, Lorraine, kept my report cards in a drawer by the telephone, a drawer my father never opened. She never made a speech about it. She just kept them, the way you keep something you believe will matter later, even when no one around you agrees. "Anybody can sit at a desk, Viv," my father would say, not cruel, just certain. The Army needs people who can carry a rifle and a wounded man at the same time. I believed him for a long time. That is the part that took me years to understand. I did not just hear him say that the quiet work was lesser. I agreed with him. I told myself that if I was good enough for long enough, the respect would catch up to me on its own. I treated it like a promotion that was already in the system, just waiting to clear. My younger brother Dean was 7 when I was 10, and he watched our father the way you watch the weather, learning which way to lean. Whatever our father admired, Dean admired louder. Whatever our father dismissed, Dean dismissed first, to be sure he was on the right side of it. He was not a bad kid. He was a kid who figured out early where the warmth in the house came from, and he stood in front of it. There is one Saturday I still think about more than the others. My father took Dean to the rifle range for the first time when my brother was 9, a small rite of passage in our house, and I asked if I could come along. My father looked at me with something almost like kindness and told me the range was no place for a girl with a book. "I would be bored," he said. "I could stay home and help my mother. I was 12 years old. I did not actually want to fire a rifle. What I wanted was to be the kind of child my father loaded into the truck on a Saturday morning because he wanted the company. I folded laundry with my mother instead, and when the 2 of them came home, sunburned and smelling of gunpowder and laughing about something that had happened at the firing line, I understood a thing I did not yet have words for. There was a country inside my own family, and I was never going to be issued a passport to it. The border had been drawn before I was old enough to argue. On one side stood the people who carried weight, the people my father could see. On the other side stood me, with my books and my languages and my grades in a drawer nobody opened, a citizen of a place my father did not believe existed. I did not resent Dean for it. He had been handed a map and told he was already on the right side of the line. I just spent a great many years studying that border, looking for the one checkpoint where they might finally let me through. It did not occur to me until I was nearly 50 that I had been trying to immigrate into a country that should have been my birthright all along. When I turned 18 in 1993, I enlisted, not in the infantry. I went in as an intelligence analyst because a recruiter looked at my language scores and went quiet for a second, the way people do when a number surprises them. He told me I could do something with that, something most people could not. It was the first time an adult had looked at the thing I was good at and called it useful instead of cute. I came home and told my family at dinner. My father set down his fork and thought about it for a moment, and then he gave me the verdict that would follow me for the next 30 years. "So, a typing job," he said. "In air conditioning." Dean laughed because Dean always laughed at the right time. My mother passed me the potatoes and squeezed my wrist under the table where no one could see. "I want to be fair to my father because this is not a story about a monster. He stood up at my enlistment. He told the neighbors his daughter was in the army. He just could not make himself believe that what I did inside the army counted because it did not look like the thing he had bled for. To him, I had found a side door into the building and called it the same as walking through the front under fire." 2 years later, in 1995, the Army selected me for a commissioning program on the strength of those same language scores. They put me through school and turned me into an officer. In May of 1997, at the age of 22, I raised my right hand and became a second lieutenant of military intelligence. My father came to the ceremony. He wore a tie. He shook my hand and called me lieutenant, and for one bright afternoon, I thought the wait was over. Then at the reception, I watched him across the room, holding a paper cup of punch, talking with real animation to one of my uncles. I drifted close enough to hear. He was not talking about me. He was talking about Dean, who was about to enlist, and who was, my father said, going to go infantry the way a castle was supposed to. I was standing there in a brand new uniform with gold bars on my shoulders, and my father was across the room praising the son who had not done anything yet, because what that son planned to do was legible to him in a way that I would never be. I did not say anything. I had already started learning the skill that would define my whole life, which is the ability to keep my face perfectly still while something inside it moves. I smiled at the right people. I thanked them for coming, and I made myself a quiet promise that I would be so good, so undeniably good, that one day the recognition would simply arrive, and I would not have to ask for it. It would take me almost 30 years to learn that recognition does not work that way. It does not arrive on its own. And the people who decided what you were when you were young are usually the last ones to update the file. The thing about my work is that the better I got at it, the less I was allowed to say about it. That is the cruel arithmetic of the intelligence world. Your competence and your silence grow together, and the people who love you only ever see the silence. They fill the rest in themselves, and they almost never fill it in with something generous. By the autumn of 2001, I was a captain. After the events of that September, I was pulled into counterterrorism fusion work, the kind that does not have a tidy office or a normal schedule. I started disappearing. I would be home for a holiday, and then I would not be, and I could not tell anyone why. I could not say where I had gone, or what I had done, or why it had mattered. I could only call when I surfaced and apologize for missing things. I missed a Christmas in 2002. I was somewhere I still will not name, doing work that I am still proud of, and my family sat down to dinner without me and decided together, in the way families do, that I simply could not be bothered, that I had a fancy job now and we were beneath it, that I had always been a little above them and now I had the salary to match. I learned to apologize for things I could not explain, is how I would describe those years to the one person I could be honest with. It is a strange kind of loneliness, being misunderstood by the people who knew you first. They had a version of me from when I was 10, and they kept it, and every absence I could not account for got added to that old version, like evidence in a case they had already decided. The Christmas I missed in 2002 is the one that calcified it. I had been told I would be home, and then, the way that work goes, I was told I would not, and I could not say why, and I could not say where, and I could not even promise a date I would resurface. I called the house on Christmas morning from a secure line that scrubbed any hint of my location, and I could hear them all in the background, the whole family, the particular noise of wrapping paper and a football game in my mother's kitchen, and I had to stand in a place I cannot describe and listen to it, like a radio broadcast from a planet I used to live on. My father took the phone for a moment. He did not ask where I was. He told me, not unkindly, that it was a shame I could never seem to make it home for the things that mattered, and that he hoped the job was worth it. I told him it was. He said he was glad somebody thought so, and handed the phone back to my mother. I stood there afterward with the line dead in my hand and understood that every hour I spent keeping people safe was being entered, back home, into a ledger of my absences. The work did not earn me credit. It earned me debt. And the worst part The part I could not explain to anyone was that on that particular morning, the thing keeping me away really had mattered, more than almost anything I have ever done. And I would go to my grave unable to tell a single person at that dinner table what it was. In 2008, my brother Dean left the Army. He had made staff sergeant, which is a real accomplishment, and he had served honestly, and I was proud of him. He went into private security contracting, the kind of work that pays well and comes with stories. At a backyard gathering that summer, he held court by the grill, telling those stories, and somewhere in the telling, he found a comfortable place to put me. "No offense, Viv," he said, flipping a burger, grinning at the cousins. "Somebody's got to run the PowerPoints while the rest of us are getting shot at." Everybody laughed. I laughed too because the alternative was to start a fight I could not win with information I was not allowed to share. I could not say that I had been shot at. I could not say that the briefing slides he was mocking had names on them, real names, real consequences, and that some of those consequences had been good men coming home who otherwise would not have. I could only hold my paper plate and let my little brother turn me into the family's gentle joke, because correcting him would have required me to break the law. In 2014, I was promoted to lieutenant colonel. I was running a theater intelligence cell by then, responsible for more than I can describe. I mentioned the promotion once on a phone call with my father, in the most offhand way I could manage because I had learned not to seem like I was asking for anything. There was a pause on the line, and then he asked me whether I had ever actually been in the field. I said yes. He let it drop, the way you let drop a thing you do not quite believe, and we moved on to the weather. The one place I could be a whole person was with Renata Soto. We had come up together as company-grade officers, two women in a world that did not have a lot of us, and she understood the cost of the silence because she paid it too. She watched me twist myself into knots, trying to be understood by people who were not even looking. "You keep waiting for them to find out who you are," she told me once over bad coffee in a worse break room. "They are not looking, Viv. They have you filed. You're going to have to stop needing them to." I told her she did not understand. She told me she understood completely, which was worse. I hung up the phone that night after a call with my mother that should have been good news, some small career milestone I had let slip, and I sat in the dark and felt the line go quiet, and I understood that I was still, at 39 years old, a girl across a room watching her father praise somebody else. In February of 2026, I walked into the lower level of the West Wing, carrying a locked case, wearing a dark civilian suit with no rank anywhere on my body, to brief the President of the United States. I had made that walk more than a dozen times since the previous summer, when I pinned on my first star and took over a National Intelligence Fusion Directorate. People imagine the Situation Room as one dramatic chamber. It is really a complex, a set of secure rooms below the West Wing, and getting into it is a process of layers. By the time I reached that final hallway, I had cleared 4 separate checkpoints. Every badge had been scanned, every credential matched, every signature logged. The system knew exactly who I was. The trouble is that a system knows things on a screen, and a young officer in a hallway only knows what he can see, and what he could see was a woman in a suit he did not recognize. A briefer does not wear a uniform to these things. You arrive in business attire, you carry your materials in a locked case, and you set up at the head of the table before the principals come in. That morning, I had something time-sensitive, the kind of briefing where the hour matters, and I came in early to get my materials laid out before the National Security Council session convened. I want to describe what that morning actually feels like, because the movies get it wrong. There is no dramatic music, no countdown clock on a giant screen. There's a windowless room, smaller than people imagine, with a long table and chairs that have held more consequential conversations than any furniture on Earth. There is the hum of the secure systems. There is coffee that nobody drinks because everyone is too keyed up. And there is the briefer, arriving early, alone, laying out her materials in a precise order she has rehearsed in her head on the drive-in, because when the principals come through that door, there will be no second chances and no room for fumbling. I had a routine. I would set the case on the table, work the combination, lay the folder square to the table's edge, and then stand for a moment with my hands flat on the surface, breathing, getting my voice down into the register where it does not shake. I had briefed colonels and generals and cabinet officials. That winter, I had started briefing the one person whose morning could change the shape of the world, and I had learned that the calmer I was, the more they trusted what I told them. So I came in early. I always came in early. That was the irony I would only appreciate later. The reason Major Vickers found a strange woman standing at the head of his table, with her hands flat on the wood, was that I cared enough about the work to arrive before anyone expected me, to be ready, to be steady. My diligence was the very thing that made me look to a young officer scanning for threats like a person who did not belong. The room was filling slowly, a few staff, a couple of seated officers reviewing their own notes. I took my position near the head of the table and began to open my case. And that is when Major Aaron Vickers, the watch officer on duty, looked up and saw a woman standing exactly where she should not be standing if she were no one. He was 34 years old, sharp, squared away, the kind of officer who takes the security of his room personally, which is a good quality until it is not. He crossed to me quickly and quietly, keeping his voice low so as not to make a scene, which I actually respected. He told me the room was restricted. I told him I was there to brief. Something in the way I said it, calm, certain, unbothered, seemed to convince him that I was either confused or self-important. One of those people who talks their way into rooms. "This room is restricted. You cannot be in here," he said. And then, when I did not immediately gather my things and flee, his patience cracked. "I don't care who told you to wait. Out." He took me by the arm, not violently, but his hand closed around my upper arm and he turned me toward the door, his other arm coming up to point the way out, and he began to walk me out of the room he was paid to protect. Behind him, the seated officers looked up, and their faces did a thing I will not forget. A kind of slow confusion, a what is happening expression, because some of them knew who I was and could not understand what they were watching. He had decided what I was the moment he saw me. 4 seconds, maybe less, and I had spent 30 years being decided about. So I did something that surprised even me. I let him walk me to the door, his hand on my arm, because I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with that morning. And because some old voice in me said, "This is just the world telling you again what it has always told you." We came through the door into the corridor, and in the corridor, walking the other way with a folder under his arm, was Lieutenant General Grant Devlin, the senior military advisor to the National Security Council, 3 stars on his shoulders, a man who had sat across a table from me every week for 8 months. He took in the scene in a single glance. A major, a woman, a hand on her arm, steering her out. His face changed, and his voice, when it came, was very quiet and very cold. The voice of a man who does not need to raise it because everyone has already decided to listen. "Major, that is Brigadier General Castle. The President is waiting on her briefing." I have watched a great many people receive bad news. I have never seen color leave a face that fast. Major Vickers's hand dropped from my arm as if my sleeve had caught fire. He took a step back. He looked at me and then at the 3 stars and then at me again, and the whole architecture of his certainty came down at once. "Ma'am, General, I didn't, there was no, I'm sorry. I should tell you that I felt triumphant in that hallway. People always expect that. The truth is that I felt the old, tired weight of it, of being right and having it cost me a moment I would rather have spent getting ready. I straightened my jacket. I picked up the case that I had somehow not let go of. And I turned around to go do my job. Behind the major, through the open door, I could see the faces at the table. The officers who had watched him walk me out were still half risen from their chairs, caught in the awkward middle of emotion, some of them with a hand on the table as if they had meant to stand and intervene and had not been fast enough. They had known, several of them had known exactly who I was, and they had watched a junior officer escort me out of the most secure room in the country, and the sheer speed of it had frozen them. I have thought about that too, in the time since. About how a confident wrong action can move faster than a whole room of correct understanding. Major Vickers had been so certain, and certainty moves quickly, and the people who knew better were still blinking when his hand landed on my arm. It is a lesson I have carried back into the work. The loudest, fastest, most confident person in the room is not always the one who is right. Often they are simply the one who never paused to wonder. I walked back into that room, and I gave the briefing of my life with the print of his hand still warm on my sleeve. That is the part civilians do not always understand about the work. There is no room for the morning you are having. The principals come in, the clock is real, and what is on those pages does not care that 90 seconds ago, a man you had never met decided you did not belong and put his hand on you to prove it. I sat up, I waited. And when the moment came, I delivered every word with the steadiness the job demands, because the steadiness is the job. Nobody in that room, looking at me, would have known anything had happened in the hallway at all. I have thought a great deal about what that costs, the composure, because it is the central fact of my professional life, and it is also, I have come to believe, the central wound of my personal one. The same machinery that let me deliver that briefing without a tremor is the machinery I built as a girl, learning to keep my face still while my father praised somebody else across a room. I taught myself young that the safest thing to do with a feeling was to file it and finish the task. It made me extraordinary at my job. It also made me the easiest person in the world to misjudge, because a woman who never lets you see the hit looks, from the outside, like a woman who was not hit at all. People mistake my steadiness for the absence of a cost. There is always a cost. I just learned to carry it where it would not interfere with the work. That morning, standing at the head of that table, with the president's attention on me and the print of a stranger's hand fading on my sleeve, I did the thing I have always done. I put the feeling in the case with the rest of my classified materials, locked it, and gave the country the steady voice it needed. And then, only later, alone, did I take it back out and look at how much it weighed. That is its own kind of skill, and it is also its own kind of cost. The composure that makes me good at my work is the same composure that let my family misread me for 3 decades. I have spent my life keeping my face still while something moves behind it. It makes me an excellent briefer. It made me an easy person to underestimate. When it was over, when the room emptied and the weight of the morning's decisions moved on to other people, General Devlin found me in a side office. He is not a sentimental man, but he was angry on my behalf in a controlled, surgical way. "Say the word, and it's a letter in his file," he told me. "Maybe more." He put hands on a general officer. "I can make this the worst day of his career." I told him I needed time to think rather than answer in anger, and he respected that, though I could tell he thought mercy would be the wrong call. He left me alone with it. That night I called Renata. I did not call her to report an outrage. I called her because she is the one person who would understand why the hallway had not felt like a single insult from a single stranger. It had felt like something much older. "It landed that hard because it wasn't new," she said, and she said it gently, which is how she says the things that are true. A stranger grabbed your arm and told you that you didn't belong in the room. Viv, that is the exact sentence your family has been whispering your whole life. He just said it out loud, in a hallway, with his hand on you. I sat with that. She was right. The reason a 4-second misjudgment from a man I would never see again could reach all the way down to the bottom of me was that it was not really about him. He had reopened a wound that had been carefully, professionally bandaged for 30 years. The major was just the latest person to look at me and decide, fast and wrong, what I could possibly be. "So what are you going to do to him?" Renata asked. And that was the real question, the one that kept me at my desk past midnight with a reprimand form unsigned in front of me, because I could end his career. It would be just. He had earned it. Part of me, the tired part, the part that was still a girl across a room, wanted very badly to make one person finally pay for all of them. But I kept thinking about a thing I could not put down. I kept thinking that someone had once looked at me and decided what I was, fast and certain and wrong, and that decision had shaped my entire life. And here I was, holding a pen over a piece of paper that would let me do the exact same thing to someone else. Decide, fast and certain, that he was nothing but the worst thing he had done in a hallway. Close the file on him the way mine had been closed on me. I looked at that form for a long time. And then I set the pen down, and I turned off the light, and I went home to sleep on the hardest easy decision I had ever made. I made 2 decisions in the days that followed, and both of them met resistance, which is usually how you know a decision is real. The first one was about Major Vickers. I asked him to meet me privately, not in front of an audience that would have turned it into a spectacle. He came in braced, the way a man comes in when he expects to be executed and just wants it over with. I did not give him that. I gave him something harder. I had decided, in the days before that meeting, exactly what I wanted to accomplish, and revenge was not on the list. Revenge would have been easy. Revenge was a signature on a form. What I wanted was harder and slower and far less satisfying in the moment, which is how I knew it was the right thing. I wanted him to actually understand what he had done. Not the rudeness of it. The rudeness was the smallest part, but the mechanism underneath it, the reflex to look at a person and decide their whole value in the space of a breath. Because I had been on the receiving end of that reflex my entire life, and I knew something about it that he did not yet know. I knew that it almost never feels like cruelty from the inside. It feels like efficiency. It feels like good judgment. My father never once thought he was being unjust to me. He thought he was being clear-eyed. Major Vickers, walking me out of that room, did not think he was committing an injustice. He thought he was doing his job well. That is what makes the reflex so dangerous and so durable. The people who have it are not villains. They are competent, well-meaning people who have confused their assumptions for their observations, and who will go on doing real harm while feeling, the entire time, like the most reasonable person in the room. I told him what assumptions cost in a building like ours. I told him that the morning he grabbed my arm, he had not made a security decision. He had made a guess and dressed it up as a security decision, and the guess was built on what he expected a general to look like. I told him that the same reflex that walked me out of that room is the reflex that gets the wrong person trusted and the right person ignored, and that in our line of work, that reflex gets people killed. You did not see me because you had already decided what I could be, I told him. That will get people killed in this building, so you are going to learn to see. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question I think he had been holding since the hallway. Why aren't you ending my career? Ma'am, with respect, I'd have it coming. Because someone once decided what I was too, I said, a long time ago and over after that, and I have spent my whole life on the wrong end of that. I am not going to pick up the same tool and use it on you just because today I'm the one holding it. I am choosing to do the opposite of what was done to me. I did not file charges. Instead, I arranged a structured corrective path for him, a mentorship, a set of requirements, real consequences, but the kind that builds something instead of just ending something. General Devlin thought I was being soft. He told me plainly that mercy gets read as weakness by people who are looking for weakness, and that I had enemies who would use it. I told him I had spent 30 years being misread, and I was not going to let the fear of being misread one more time decide what kind of officer I was going to be. He did not agree, but he stopped arguing, which from him is a kind of agreement. The second decision was about my family, and it started, as these things do, with my phone. Dean called me a few days later. He had heard something, a garbled secondhand thing, from a contractor buddy who had heard from someone who had heard that a one-star general got physically removed from the Situation Room. To Dean, it was gossip, a funny piece of Beltway theater, the kind of story you tell at a bar. He was halfway through chuckling about it when something in my silence made him slow down. Wait, he said. Wait, that was you? Somebody actually grabbed you in the actual Situation Room? For the first time in my life, I did not make myself small to keep the peace. I did not laugh it off or change the subject or protect him from the size of what he had just stumbled into. Yes, I said. It was me. In the room you've spent 15 years assuming I'm not important enough to be in. A major put his hand on my arm and walked me out because he took one look at me and decided I was nobody. You should know that feeling. You've been doing it to me since you were 7. The line went very quiet. My brother, who always had something to say, who always had a joke ready for the right moment, had nothing. I could hear him recalculating on the other end, the whole comfortable story he had told himself about his sister tilting under his feet. My father, when he heard a version of it, reacted the only way he knew how, with disbelief, defaulting to doubt, asking Dean if I had exaggerated. But I was done litigating the truth with him. I had decided I would stop trying to win a case the jury refused to hear. The strange thing about telling the truth is that it does not just change you. It starts changing the people around you in ways you do not get to control. Major Vickers, in the weeks after our conversation, did the work. I had braced myself for sullen compliance, a man going through the motions to save his career. That is not what I got. He shadowed the briefing process. He sat in on the vetting, learned what it actually takes for a person to stand where I stood that morning, the years of clearances, the depth of the background investigation, the sheer accumulated trust that a briefer represents by the time they reach that table. And somewhere in that, his contrition turned into something far more useful. It turned into understanding. He said something to me near the end of his corrective period that I believed. I keep thinking about how fast I decided, he said. 4 seconds, maybe less. I didn't even look at the badge on your case. I saw what I expected a general to look like, and you weren't it, so I stopped thinking. That's the part that scares me. Not that I was rude, that I stopped thinking and called it doing my job. That is a man who learned the actual lesson, not just the surface of it. I have known colonels who never got that far. What moved me, watching it happen, was that the lesson did not make him smaller. I think he had come into our first meeting expecting that understanding his failure would diminish him, would mark him permanently as the man who grabbed a general. Instead, it did the opposite. A person who can look squarely at the worst thing they have done, understand it all the way to the bottom, and change because of it, is not a smaller person afterward. They are a larger one. I had seen the alternative many times in my career. The officer who makes a bad call and then spends all his energy defending it, building a fortress of excuses around a mistake until the fortress becomes bigger than the man. Vickers did not build the fortress. He walked into the open and let the thing be true, and he came out the other side better at his job and, I suspect, better at being a person. I told General Devlin as much the next time the subject came up. He had wanted charges. He had been certain that mercy would be wasted on a man like that. I told him to go look at the watch officer now and tell me the mercy had been wasted. He did not say I had been right. But he did not say I had been wrong either. And he started in the weeks after, sending me the occasional young officer who had stumbled, with a short note that said only, "You are better at this part than I am." Dean, meanwhile, was doing his own digging, within the limits of what anyone could tell him. He could not learn the classified specifics, and he knew better than to try. But he could learn the shape of my life. And for the first time in his adult life, he actually wanted to. He learned what a fusion directorate is. He learned what a star means, and how few people wear one, and how long it takes. He learned, and this is the part that I think finally cracked him, that the President of the United States sometimes begins his morning with my voice in the room, telling him the things he most needs to know before the day can start. My brother had spent 15 years casting me as the person who runs the PowerPoints, and it turned out the PowerPoints were the most important pages in the country on the mornings I carried them. He called our mother about it. I know because she told me later. He asked her, almost accusingly, why nobody had ever told him how big this was. And my mother, who had kept my report cards in a drawer by the telephone for 40 years, finally said, out loud, the thing she had always known. "I stopped trying to tell your father a long time ago," she told him. He had decided, and once your father decides, the conversation is over. But I never stopped knowing. Your sister has been carrying something heavy and quiet her whole life, and she carried it without ever once getting to set it down and show anybody. So no, Dean. Nobody told you. You weren't listening, and the one person who would have made you listen gave up trying before you were old enough to hear it. And my father, alone in his house, did a thing I only found out about much later. He stood in front of his shadow box, the one on the living room wall, the one with his infantry decorations arranged exactly the way he had arranged them for 50 years, and for the first time, he did not look at his own medals. He looked past them, at the empty wall beside them, and he wondered for the first time in his life what was in his daughter's shadow box that he had never asked to see, that he was not allowed to see, that he had spent 30 years assuming was empty because it did not hang where he could count it. Relationships do not snap back into place. They get rebuilt, slowly, on new terms, by people willing to do the work, and the work is not glamorous. It is mostly just telling the truth, and then sitting still while it lands. Dean came to see me, not on the phone, not in a group, not with an audience to perform for. He drove out and sat in my kitchen, and he did not have a single joke ready. I watched him search for one, out of old habit, and watched him decide not to use it. That alone told me something had changed. We sat at that table for a long time, longer than either of us expected, and we did the slow archaeology of 15 years. He told me things I had not known he carried. He told me that the year I made lieutenant colonel, he had looked it up, what the rank meant, how much responsibility it held, and that the size of it had frightened him so badly that he had doubled down on the joke that same week, because the joke was the only way he knew to make himself feel level with me again. He told me he had been at a job site once, years ago, when a real intelligence officer had come through, and one of the senior men had spoken about that officer with a kind of reverence Dean had never once heard anyone use about a contractor, and that he had gone home that night and picked a fight with his wife about something unrelated because he could not name the actual thing eating at him. I listened to all of it without saying very much, because I have learned that when a person is finally telling the truth, after a long time of not telling it, The most useful thing you can do is not interrupt the confession to make it about your own forgiveness. I let him say all of it, and when he was done, the air in the kitchen felt different, lighter, the way a room feels after you finally open a window that has been painted shut for years. I made you the punchline so I didn't have to feel small, he said finally, turning a coffee mug around and around in his hands. That's the whole truth of it. You were doing something I couldn't understand, and instead of asking, I made it smaller so I wouldn't have to feel like the little brother who stayed a staff sergeant while his sister was off doing something that mattered. I told myself you thought you were better than us. The truth is, I was scared you actually were, and I got there first so it wouldn't hurt as much. I could have made him pay for that. I had 30 years of receipts. Instead, I told him the other half of the truth, the half that was mine. I know, I said, and I let you. For 15 years, I let you make me the joke because I wanted to keep the peace more than I wanted the truth. I could have corrected you. I could have pushed back. I didn't because being the family joke was easier than being the family stranger. So we both did this. You made me small and I let myself be made small. That part's on me. We set new terms in that kitchen, the way you would negotiate anything real. I told him I would share what I could, the shape of things if not the substance, and that in return I was done apologizing for the silence around the rest. The silence was never a choice. It was the job, and it was the law, and I was finished letting it be held against me like a character flaw. And the jokes were over. Not because I could not take them, but because I had finally decided I should not have to. He agreed, and the way he said it, quiet and a little ashamed and entirely sincere, told me he meant it. Vickers earned his way to solid ground in the same stretch of weeks. There was a moment, I heard about it secondhand, where a senior civilian he did not recognize came through with credentials he had not seen before, and instead of deciding what she was and acting on the guess, he slowed down, verified, treated her with the careful respect you extend to someone before you know exactly who they are. The old Vickers would have made a fast call and dressed it up as security. The new one did the patient, unglamorous, correct thing. The lesson had taken. Renata noticed the change in me before I did. We were on the phone, a lighter call than most, and she went quiet in the middle of it and then said, "You sound different." "Different how?" "You stopped auditioning," she said. "For the first time since I've known you, you're not waiting in the wings for someone to call your name. You finally stopped auditioning for them." She was right. I had spent my whole adult life performing competence at a family that had bought its ticket and then refused to watch the show. And somewhere in those weeks, without quite deciding to, I had walked off the stage, not in anger, in relief. Time passed, the way it does, and the pieces of my life kept quietly realigning, but nothing was tied off yet. There was still one person who had not spoken, and his silence, which had always been a wall, had started to feel like something else. Like a man working up to something. My life in those weeks had a new evenness to it that I was not used to. The work was as relentless as ever. The hours did not get shorter, the stakes did not get lower. The weight of what I carried into that building did not lighten by a single ounce. But the private war, the one I had been fighting since I was a girl at a kitchen table, had gone quiet, and the quiet changed everything. I would catch myself not braced for the next dismissal. I had spent so long with my guard up against the people who were supposed to be on my side that lowering it felt almost like floating. I noticed it in small, almost embarrassing ways. I caught myself, at a work dinner, telling a story about my family without the reflexive flinch I had carried for decades. The bracing for someone to ask why my own people did not seem to know what I did. I caught myself looking forward to my mother's phone calls instead of stealing for them. I caught myself one evening, realizing I had gone an entire week without rehearsing. Somewhere in the back of my mind, the speech I would give my father if he ever finally asked. I had carried versions of that speech around for 30 years, polishing it, revising it, a closing argument for a trial that never came to court. And one ordinary Tuesday I went looking for it out of habit and found that I had stopped maintaining it. I had let it gather dust. I had, without deciding to, finally believed Renata, who had told me 100 times that the verdict I was waiting for was a verdict I had the power to issue myself. The relief of that was enormous and quiet, the way the biggest changes usually are. Nobody throws a parade for the day you stop needing something you needed your whole life. You just wake up one morning and notice the wanting has gone still, and the silence where it used to be is the most peaceful sound you have ever heard. Dean started telling me things about our father. Small things, the way you report weather you are not sure about. Dad had been asking questions, he said. Slow ones, around the edges, the way proud men ask about a thing they are not ready to admit they got wrong. He had asked Dean what a 1-star actually is, what it takes to get there, how many of them there are in the whole army. Whether, Dean said carefully, whether it was possible that he had had it wrong about me for a long time. I did not chase it. That is the part I am most proud of, looking back. The old me would have grabbed that thread and pulled, would have called my father that night, would have laid out my whole career like evidence, and demanded the verdict I had wanted since I was 22. But I had finally learned what Renata had been telling me for years. I did not need the verdict anymore. I had stopped waiting for him to see me, and a strange thing happens when you genuinely put that weight down. You stop arranging your life around the moment it ends. Still, I let myself hope. A little. Which is its own kind of risk, maybe the biggest one, because hope is the thing that had hurt me the most, over and over, for 30 years. I had spent my whole life waiting for my father to see me. The strange thing about finally setting that weight down is that you almost do not notice when the thing you stopped waiting for starts, quietly, to arrive. It arrived on a Tuesday in my mailbox, in an envelope addressed in my father's handwriting. I knew it the second I saw it. Nobody writes like a career first sergeant, that blocky, deliberate, all capitals hand. Every letter pressed hard enough to feel on the back of the page. He had not written me a letter in my entire adult life. He was not a man of letters. He was a man of verdicts delivered across dinner tables, and here was an envelope, sealed, heavy, with my name on it in his hand. I carried it inside. I set it on the kitchen counter, and then I did not open it for a full day. I told myself I was busy, which was true, and also a lie. The truth is that the envelope held one of two things. It held the apology I had wanted for 30 years, or it held one more verdict, one more careful explanation of why I still did not quite measure up. And as long as I did not open it, both were still possible, and I was not sure I was strong enough to find out which one my father had decided to send. I opened it the next evening, standing at the counter, still in my work clothes. It was 2 pages. Front and back, that same hard block hand, no greeting card softness to any of it. My father did not know how to be flowery, and he did not try. He wrote the way he talked plainly, except that this time, for the first time, he was talking about me, and he was not delivering a verdict. He was correcting the record. He wrote that he had spent his whole life believing he knew what a soldier was. A man with a rifle and mud on his boots. A man who could carry a wounded brother out of a bad place. He wrote that he had measured me against that picture from the day I was 18 and found me wanting, every year, for 30 years. And that he had been too proud and too certain to ever wonder if the picture was too small. And then he wrote the line that I have folded and unfolded so many times the crease is going soft. I spent my life thinking a soldier was a man with a rifle, he wrote. You spent yours keeping men like me from ever needing to raise one. I had it backwards. I measured you with the only ruler I had, and the ruler was wrong, and you were the one who paid for it. All those years, while I sat in my chair and called it wisdom. I am proud of you, Viv. I have been proud of you for longer than I let myself know. I should have said it 30 years ago, when it would have cost me something. I am saying it now, and I know it is late. You were the best soldier in this family, and I was the last one to see it. I read it standing up. Then I sat down at my own kitchen table, the way I used to sit at his, and I read it again. He called me a few days later. It was awkward, the way real things are awkward, 2 people who do not have the vocabulary for the thing they are finally doing. There were long pauses. Neither of us made a speech. He asked how my work was. I told him what I could, the shape of it, and he listened, actually listened, and asked a question, and listened to the answer. It does not sound like much. It was everything. It was 30 years arriving all at once through a phone line, quietly, with no fanfare, because that is how the realest things tend to come. I have witnessed, in a manner of speaking, a lot of reconciliations in my line of work, the careful business of 2 parties who have hurt each other, deciding to stand on the same ground again. I knew in theory how it was supposed to go. I did not expect it to be so plain. There was no weeping, no grand apology delivered on bended knee, none of the cinematic catharsis I had imagined across 30 years of imagining it. There was just a man in his 70s asking his daughter how her work was, and meaning it, and waiting for the answer. That was the whole miracle. The miracle was the waiting for the answer. My father had spent my entire life delivering verdicts and moving on before I could respond. And now here he was, on a crackling phone line, having delivered nothing, asking instead, and then holding the silence open long enough for me to fill it. I told him about a briefing, the shape of it, nothing I should not say. I told him what it felt like to carry that kind of trust into a room. And he said, after a pause, that he thought it must take a particular kind of courage, the kind that does not get a parade, the kind nobody sees. Coming from him, the man who had spent 50 years believing courage was only the kind everyone could see. It was the most generous sentence he had ever said to me. A few weeks later, there was a small gathering, nothing formal, just family. My father took me aside. He did not perform it for the room. He just asked me, genuinely, to tell him whatever I was allowed to tell him about what I did. And I did. Dean stood nearby with no joke on his face, just listening, a grown man finally hearing his sister. My mother watched from across the room, and I caught her eye, and she had the particular expression of a woman watching a thing she had known privately for 40 years finally become a thing the whole family could see. She had kept my report cards in a drawer through all of it. She had known the whole time. She just had to wait for everyone else to catch up. My father pulled me aside near the end of the evening, out on the back step where it was quiet, and he did a thing I had never once seen him do. He apologized to my face, not in a letter, not at a distance, but standing in front of me in the cold, with his hands pushed down in his pockets like a much younger man. He said he had wasted a lot of years being certain, and that certainty had turned out to be the most expensive thing he ever owned, and that he was sorry it had cost me the most. I told him we did not have to settle the whole account in one night. He nodded at that. We stood out there a while longer, not saying very much, two soldiers of different kinds finally standing the same watch. It was enough. After 30 years, it was more than enough. I want to tell you what the recognition felt like because I had imagined it for so long that I owed it an honest report. I had always assumed that the day someone finally saw me would feel like winning. A trumpet. A vindication. The good kind of I told you so. It did not feel like that at all. It felt like setting down something I had carried so long that I had forgotten it was heavy. You know how you can hold a weight for so many hours that the ache becomes just the temperature of your body, just the way things are, until the moment you put it down and the lightness almost knocks you over? That is what it felt like. Not a victory. A release. The major who walked me out of that room taught me something, in the end, that my whole career had not quite managed to. He showed me, in 4 seconds in a hallway, the exact thing my family had done to me for 30 years, so cleanly and so undeniably that I could finally see the shape of it whole. And then choosing not to do the same thing back to him, choosing to teach him instead of break him, was the moment I stopped being the girl across the room and became the woman who decided she would not pass the wound down the line. So here is what I will leave you with, because I suspect some of you are carrying your own version of this. Some of you have been waiting a long time for someone to finally notice what you are worth. A parent, a sibling, a boss, a whole family with a version of you they decided on years ago and never updated. I know that weight. I lived inside it for 30 years. You already know what you are worth. You do not need the letter in the mail to make it true. The day they finally catch up to you is just the day they catch up. It is a good day, and I hope it comes for you. And I hope it is a Tuesday with your name in someone's handwriting. But do not wait for it to start living like the truth about you is already true. Because it is. It was true the whole time. The only thing that was ever missing was an audience. And you, my friend, were never the one who needed to change. I keep my father's letter in a drawer now. It is the drawer where I also keep my mother's old report cards, the ones she carried out of that house and handed to me without a word the day she decided I should have them. 2 kinds of proof from the 2 people in that house who saw me, one of them 40 years early and one of them 30 years late. Both of them mine now. The wait, at last, is over. If you've ever carried something heavy and quiet that the people closest to you refused to see, I want you to know I understand. Telling this story still isn't easy for me. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Was I right to give that major a second chance instead of ending his career? Have you ever waited years for a parent to finally say they were proud of you? And if that moment ever came, did it feel the way you always thought it would? If this story meant something to you, take a second to like it, subscribe, and stay a while. It means more to me than you know.